Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. If this is your first time seeing my YouTube channel or my face, thank you so much for stopping by. To my returning subscribers, thank you so much for your support so far. I love you all. In today's video, I'll be teaching you guys how to cut and sew this beautiful, trendy, stylish dress that has a cowl effect around the shoulder and this wrap design. So I got my inspiration from Gemma Wears. So I'll be sharing with you how I cut and how I sew this dress. So if this is what you're interested in, please keep on watching, watch to the end. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. So let's get right started into the video. In this tutorial, these are the fabrics or the materials I'm going to be working with. So I have this beautiful crepe fabric which is 2 yards. I use 2 yards. If you're on the bigger side, please use 3 yards. I have this black ST that I'm going to be ironing to my fabric. Now this part is optional. I just want this ST to give structure to my fabric, and once I iron this, it's not going to have that stretchy part again. So I have my curve rule, my ruler, my pattern paper, my tape, my pencil, my masking tape, and my marker. So let's start drafting this right now. On my pattern paper, I already have my vertical lines marked out. So I'm going to show you guys how I actually did that. From the beginning of my pattern paper, I marked to my bust point, which is 10. I marked to my waist point, which is 16. And then for my hip line, I marked from my waistline down, which is 9 inches. And then I measured from the top of the paper to the dress length, which is 36 inches. That's the dress length I'm working with. From the center front of my pattern paper, I marked my shoulder measurement divided by 2. I marked it there. Then from the starting of the paper, I came down by 1 inch for my shoulder slope. And then from my shoulder slope, I marked my armhole line. That is my armhole round divided by 2. And then for the neck width, I marked out 3.5 inches for the neck width. And then I also came down around my armhole line and replicated my shoulder measurement that I marked up there, and then I drew a straight line to connect it. From my shoulder line, I marked down 4 inches for my neck depth for the front part, and then I used my straight rule to connect it into a box-like form. And then I connected the points from the shoulder line to the neck depth with a curve ruler like so. From the center front of my pattern paper, I marked out my nipple to nipple measurement divided by 2 on my bust line, my waistline, and on my hip line. And then I used my straight rule to connect those lines facing downward like so. To get the midpoint of my armhole, I'm going to place my tape just after the shoulder slant and then try to get the midpoint between these lines. And what I have there is 4 inches. So that's my midpoint. Then from that midpoint, I'm going to go inward by half of an inch. Then I will use my straight rule and connect from the tip of my shoulder slant to that half inch. On my chest line, I marked a quarter of my bust measurement, and then my bust measurement is 35 inches. 35 divided by 4, I have 8.75. I use my curve roller to connect from that midpoint at the armhole to my bust measurement marking right there. We are done creating the armhole line. On the waistline, I went out by half inch on both sides from that nipple to nipple line, and then from the waistline, I came down by 6 inches for the length of my dart. Then I used my straight rule to connect from those darts to the bust point, and from the bust point to the length of the dart, like so. On my waistline, I marked a quarter of my waist measurement across like so, and then whatsoever I had between those darts, I replace it back, which is 1 inches. You're going to replace it after your measurement, and then I want this dress to be a little bit tapered around my waistline, so I minus quarter of an inch from the darts I replaced, so it can give me a little bit of a cinch effect around my waist area. On my hip line, I marked a quarter of my hip measurement across like so, and then I used my straight rule to connect the points. From the hip line, whatsoever measurement I marked there, I'm going to extend it to the dress length and mark it out like so. And then I'm going to also go inward by 1 inch because this dress is a pencil dress. I'll just use my straight rule and connect the points like so. So I'm done drafting my basic bodice now. So because I want this dress to have a side dart, I'm going to minus my shoulder to waist measurement at the front from the shoulder to waist measurement at the back. And the difference I have is 1.5 inches. I'm going to mark it from my bust line downward like so. And then I'm going to use my straight rule and connect it to nipple line like so. So I want to do a shoulder tightening here. This process is actually optional, but I do this on my dresses because I love the fit it gives me on my body. So I divided the rest of my shoulder into two like so, and then I marked it at the midpoint. I used my straight rule to connect it all the way to the bust line because I want to take a shoulder dart around that area. At that center line I marked around the shoulder, I went out by a quarter inch on both sides of that middle line, and then I used my straight rule to connect it to the bust line like so. At the shoulder line, I measured what I had in between the darts, but I later on replaced just quarter of an inch at the extreme end of the armhole line. And then I used my curve ruler to connect it all the way to the armhole line or the chest line like so. Please, when connecting these lines, watch my curve ruler placement carefully before you draw out your line. From the initial bust line, I folded it around my straight line like so, and then I brought it down to the 1.5 inches that I came down from the bust line like so. I'm trying to do this so I can try and close up the shortage. After I closed my bust dart, I noticed there's a shortage around that area. So I used my straight rule to connect from the chest line to that bust line just to cover that shortage like so. So then I used my ruler to outline that center crease line I got from folding the bust dart like so. From the center line in between the bust dart, I went out by half of an inch. Then I connected a slant line from my bust line to that half of an inch, and from that half of an inch to the 1.5 inch bust dart. I did this because I don't want to have shortage when I'm stitching these bust darts on my fabric. At this point, I cut out the two dart legs around the shoulder like so, so I can try and close up that shoulder area. After cutting out the two dart legs around the shoulder, I used my masking tape to close up that space like so, just like I'm doing right here. After closing the darts at the shoulder area, the shoulder is not aligning, so I use my straight rule to connect it into a straight line like so, so it can align. On my pattern paper here, if you notice, you can see my sellotape around that waist dart, and then I taped back my waist, my upper bodies down to the skirt part. So I did this because I wanted to see how I can be able to take out the darts at the waistline, the shoulder line, and the bust line, and how I can be able to close all the three darts at once. But when I did that, I noticed that my bust area was puffy, so I can't cut this on fabric like that. After making my corrections on my pattern paper, I went ahead to cut out my front part of the dress like so. For the back pattern of the dress, I already marked out my vertical lines the same way I did for the front. So I placed my tape from the starting of my pattern paper. I marked my chest line, my bust line, and my waistline. Now, my waistline for the back is not the same thing for the front. My waistline for the back is 14.5 inches. Then I placed my tape from the waistline and I marked my hip line like so. From the starting of my pattern paper or shoulder line, I marked my full dress length, which is 36 inches. From the center of the pattern paper, I marked my shoulder measurement divided by 2 across like so. And then I marked my shoulder measurement. And then I came down by 1 inches as my shoulder slope. and then I measured my armhole measurement divided by 2, and then I drew a straight line across, just the same way we did for the front to get the chest line. On my bust line, I marked my nipple to nipple measurement divided by 2, like so, from the center line. I marked it on my waistline and also on my hip line. Then I used my straight ruler to connect it. So on my waistline, I went out by half inch for my dart, and then from my waistline, I came down by 6 inches, and then I connected my dart legs like so. Just basically the same process we did for the front. On my waistline, I marked a quarter of my waist measurement across like so. So if you can remember at the front, I measured my dart intake and then I replaced it by the sides. And then I went inward by quarter of an inch because I wanted the dress to be a little bit tapered around my waist. But I'm not going to be doing that at the back, because if I take that quarter inch again, I may be unable to zip up my dress properly, except you're using an inner built corset. So just maintain your dart at the back. On my hip line, I marked a quarter of my hip measurement across like so, and then I marked the same hip measurement at my dress length like so. And I also went inward by 1 inch because this is a pencil dress. Then I used my straight rule to connect from the hem of the dress to the hip line like so. So guys, if you notice, I didn't add any zipper allowance to this back part because I want to make alterations. I want to do away with the zipper bulge at the back of the dress. On my center back on the waistline, I went inward by half of an inch, and then from the waistline I went up by half of an inch, and then also half of an inch downward. So I used my straight ruler to connect to those half inch the center back to the waistline like so. On my waistline, I came down by 6 inches, and then I used my straight ruler to connect from that half inch to that 6 inch in a slant like form, and then I connected from that half inch to the up part like so. For my neckline at the back, I came down by 1.5 inches as my neck depth, and then I went inward by 3.5 inches for my neck width. So I went ahead to cut out that zipper bulge that around the waistline like so to the sides. Then I used my masking tape to close that opening like so. So please don't overlap it, just bring it together and tape it down. Then I went ahead to cut out the zipper bolt slant line at the center back like so. So I measured out the zipper bulge that I took out on my waistline. So I want to replace it at the dress length at the center back because I wouldn't want it shorting at the center back. So the main aim here is to make have your back pattern align with the front piece. So I wouldn't want to have shortage. Even if I add this allowance and there's excess, I can still trim it out. So I added like half inch all the way to the other side, and then I ruled a straight line. So I'm done drafting the back piece. I'm going to go ahead and cut it out. So on my back bodice, I also want to do a shoulder tightening. The same way I did shoulder tightening at the front, I will do this on the back so the shoulders can align. On my shoulder line, I got the midpoint of that shoulder like so, and then I marked it out. Then I connected a straight line from that midpoint to my chest line like so. At the center point of that shoulder line, I went out by quarter inch on both sides, and then I used my straight ruler to connect it in a slant line to the chest line like so. Like I said, this method is optional. From the darts we took at the shoulder line, I'm going to just replace just quarter of an inch at the extreme end of the armhole. I'll use my curve ruler and place it and connect it to the midpoint like so. Then I went ahead to cut out the shoulder darts like so. After closing the shoulder dart, I noticed that the shoulder slope wasn't aligning, so I used my straight ruler to blend it and connect it like so. Then I went ahead to cut out the armhole like so. So I'm done drafting the front and the back body, so I'll just place it on my fabric and cut it out. So before I go ahead and place my pattern on my fabric and cut it out, I remember I said I use stay, so I'm going to go ahead and iron my stay to the wrong side of the fabric. This method is totally optional. If you don't want to do this, you can skip this part, but I want this to give my dress a little bit of structure, so I'm going to iron this off camera. After ironing the stay to the wrong side of my fabric, I folded this fabric right sides facing each other like so. At the bust line, I added 1.5 inches stitching allowance all around. On my waistline, around my hip line, I added 1.5 inch stitching allowance. And then for the hemming allowance, I also added 1.5 inches. At the shoulder, I added half inch for joining the shoulders together. So I went ahead to cut this out. At the bust dart, I used my pins to pin along those lines so I can be able to see or trace that bust dart at the other side of the fabric, at the wrong side. So just try to trace this out. You're also going to trace out the waist dart as well. Pin along those lines and use your chalk to mark it out. But I'll do this off camera. At the center part of the back pattern, I added 1 inch zipper allowance from the waist to the top and also at the down part like so. So around the hemline, I also added 1.5 inches hemming allowance. At the sides of the dress, I added 1.5 inches stitching allowance at the hip line, the waistline, the bust line, also at the hemline, just like I'm doing right here. At the shoulder line, I added half-inch stitching allowance to join the shoulders. So after doing that, I went ahead to cut out the dress. After cutting it out, I have my front and my back piece ready for stitching. So because I didn't cut this pattern paper on fold, I pinned the center front of that pattern paper on a fresh new pattern paper so I can get the two both sides of the skirt so I can work on the design. So because the design starts from the waistline, I slashed my waistline across like so so I can work on the skirt part alone. After cutting out my half scale bodies off the pattern, I went ahead to cut out the darts on my skirt so I can be able to sellotape it together. Then I used my masking tape to close the dart so I can go ahead and cut the sides. After closing the skirt dart opening, I went ahead to use my pins to pin it down at the center so I can be able to cut it out by the sides. I also pin the other sides of the skirt to the fresh new pattern paper. Then I went ahead to cut out the other half side of the skirt like so. After taking out the pins at the center front of the pattern paper, so I replicated my hip line on the other part of the skirt. After taking out the pins, so I just place the pattern paper together like so at the middle point. So I'm going to tape it down at that center point so we can work on the design. After joining the two sides of the skirt at the center point, this is what I have right here. And then at the hem part of that skirt part, I added another fresh pattern paper of about 3 inches for that design. So I also joined that area. So let's work on the design. From the waist part of my skirt, I came down by half of an inch on the left hand side, and then I went inward by 2.5 inches at the right hand side of the skirt. Then I used my straight ruler to connect from that half inch to that 2.5 inches like so. Meanwhile, around that 2.5 inches, I came down by 1.5 inches from the top like so. At the hem part of the skirt, from the midpoint, I went out by 3 inches towards the right hand side, and then I used my straight ruler and connected from the top point to that down part of the skirt like so. From the initial length of this skirt around this point, I came down by 1.5 inches. Then I used my curve ruler to connect it to the sides like so. Then I went ahead to cut it out. After cutting it out, I placed it on my fabric and cut it out. So I cut out my asymmetric design on my fabric like so. So at that slant side, I added half-inch stitching allowance. At the sides, I added 1.5 inches stitching allowance. The top and the bottom, I added half-inch stitching allowance. I also cut out the lining for it as well. For the back part of the dress, I went ahead to cut out facing for this. So I lost the clip when I was cutting this. But the trick here is just to fold your fabric into two, place and trace out your neckline and cut it out. And then the width of your cape is 3 inches or more. Then I took out my pattern paper from the back part of the dress. So you can see I've already traced out my dart, and then I did the same thing for the other side. So I'm going to pinch it at that middle point. I'll go ahead and stitch the darts down. I'll do the same thing for the other side as well. Taking one of my back facing, I place it right sides facing each other like so. I went ahead to stitch it down by half of an inch, and I'll do the same thing for the other side. For the front part of the dress, I also traced out my waist dart and my bust dart, and I also cut out my facing. Just like I explained earlier, you're just going to fold your fabric into two, place it at the center like so, cut out your neckline, and then cut out the length of your facing, which is 3 inches or more. For the front part of the dress, I went ahead to fold my darts from the center line, and I went ahead to stitch it down on my sewing machine. For the front facing of the dress, I placed it right sides facing each other. I went ahead to stitch it down by half of an inch. I'll do that and bring it back for you guys to see. For the cowl rouge design at the shoulder area, I cut out these two pieces, which is 29 inches long and 10 inches wide. So if you want yours to be more fuller, you can make it to 11 inches. So I cut out two pieces. So I ironed stay to it, but please don't iron stay to yours because it won't give you that cowl effect well enough. So I placed the two pieces right sides facing each other. I'll stitch it down at the top and the bottom like so. After stitching my waist dart and my bust dart on the front part of my dress, this is what I have. So when I was stitching this dart, I came down 1 inches downward from where that dart started, and then 1 inch away from where that bust dart started before I started stitching, because I didn't want it to have pointy effects around the bust area. So after stitching my facing, I flipped it to the wrong side, and then I hemmed it down with hemming gum, just like I've done right here. I also went ahead to stitch my dart for the back part of the dress, and I ironed the dart area. I stitched my facing and then I flipped it to the wrong side. I ironed my hemming gum to it, but I didn't iron it all the way to the other side because I'll be using that back facing to finish my shoulder seam. So that is what I've done right here. So guys, for this cowl rouge design, please don't add any stay or interface into it. I did this because I felt like that fabric was too light, but at the end of the day I had to take it out because it was not giving me that cowl effect I wanted. After placing it right sides facing each other and stitching it down by quarter of an inch at the top and the bottom, I turned it inside out. So I arranged it properly. So I'm going to take it to my ironing board and iron it down very flat. After ironing, I'll top stitch at both ends. After stitching this cowl effect fabric piece, I top stitch it at both ends like so. So the next thing I'm going to do right now is I'll do that pleating at the shoulder. So I took the ends of that fabric piece, and then I placed it from the nape of my neck, and then I made pleats like so, leaving half of an inch to join my sleeve. So I'm going to pin it down. I repeated the same pleating process at the other side of the shoulder like so. After pinning down the pleat at the shoulder, I'll go ahead and take it to my stitching machine to stitch it down. For the ropes at the side of the dress, it measures 23 inches long and 6 inches wide. So if you want yours longer, please increase the length. So I folded this piece into two like so. I'll stitch it down by half of an inch, turn it inside out. I'll do the same thing for the other piece as well. After stitching down my shoulder pleats on both sides like so, the next thing I'm going to do right now is I'll join the shoulder. Taking my two back piece, I place it right sides facing each other, and then I'm going to place it like so, and then I'll flip the facing to the other side so I can stitch it down. But first of all, I had to arrange it properly and pin it down. After pinning down, I'll take it to my stitching machine to stitch it down by half of an inch. I will repeat the same process for the other side as well. I'll just place it right sides facing each other and flip the facing to the other side. After stitching my ropes and turning it inside out, I gave it a good press. So I'm going to take my front design right now, and then from the top of that design around that slant area, I came down by half of an inch. Then I pinned down one of the rope from that half inch I came down from the waist like so. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'll bring the lining for my front design piece and place it on top, right sides facing each other. But before I do that, I'll stitch that rope down to hold it down. So I'll place my lining, stitch it down around that slant line by half of an inch at the top and the bottom, leaving the sides open so I can flip it inside out. After stitching my shoulders on both sides, this is what I have. So for the asymmetric flap design at the front of the dress, I've already stitched my lining to the fabric. I turned it inside out and ironed it, so I'll top stitch by the sides. From my waistline, I came down by half of an inch, and then I marked it out with a chalk. Then I took my asymmetric flap design, I placed it on the front side of the dress. From that half inch, I came down from the waist, and then I pinned it down around that side. So I'm going to take it to my stitching machine to top stitch around the side. At the other side of the waist, I came down by half of an inch from the waistline, and then I took my other rope and placed it on top of that half of an inch, and I pin it down. So I'll go ahead and stitch it down to hold it down. For the sleeve of the dress, I already cut out a short basic sleeve. If you don't know how to cut a basic sleeve, I have a tutorial on that. I'll drop a link in my description box. So the length of this sleeve is 9 inches, and then I also folded the hemming allowance of about 1.5 inches. So the next thing I'm going to do right now is I'll fold the sleeve into two like so. I'll notch it at the midpoint so I can illustrate on how to fix the sleeve. So at the shoulder joining, I'll place the center matching each other, and then I'll pin it down. So I didn't pin this to the extreme end of the armhole because this video is already getting long. Just take it to your stitching machine and align it on both sides and stitch it down by half of an inch. But before you do that, fold your hemming allowance around the sleeve and stitch it down. So I pinned down my two back pieces together, right sides facing each other like so. And then I also went ahead to mark out my zipper allowance from the top to the bottom. So I'll go ahead and make a loose stitch and go ahead and also stitch my zip. So I placed my zipper on top of the dress from the top, and I marked where the zipper stopped on the dress so I can stitch it down. So because this dress is a short dress, there won't be any need for any slit. So I'll stitch the rest of that zipper along. After stitching the sides of my asymmetric flap design to the sides of the dress, this is what I have. I also went ahead to stitch my sleeve. I hem my sleeve as well. I did that for the other side as well. I also fixed my zipper at the back part of my dress, and this is what I have, looking so smooth and clean. So I'm going to place my front piece on my back piece, right sides facing each other, and I'll pin it down. After pinning the sides of my dress down, I went ahead to use my chalk to mark out my sewing allowances by the side. I did the same thing for the other side as well. At the waist side of my dress, I took out my pins just to illustrate something to you guys. So at the other side where the belt is, if you notice, the belt didn't extend to the side of the dress. So whatsoever allowance I marked on my dress, I marked it on the right side of my dress, and I pinned my belt directly on that line so the rope won't short. So after I've done that, I placed it back and pinned it down. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take it to my stitching machine and stitch it down by the sides. After stitching the side seam allowance of the dress on both sides, this is what I have. So our dress is almost ready. So guys, remember that zipper bulge that we slashed out from our waist? I replaced it at the hem of the dress. I did that so my back won't be shorting. Even if there's excess, I'll trim it out. So when I joined my dress together, the front and the back piece, I have excess there. So I'll go ahead and trim it off. For the down part of the dress, I folded the hem of my dress inward by 1.5 inches as my hemming allowance. I'll do that all round and then I'll stitch it down. So I'll also open the sides of my dress, my side seams, and iron it so it can lay very flat and give this a good finishing. So guys, before I hemmed this dress, I wore it on my body and I discovered that the length of the dress on my body was shorter than I expected. So I didn't hem it by that 1.5 inch. I used my bias to hem the down part of the dress. I also ironed my side seams like so. So you're going to use your weaving machine and weave it. So I'll just turn this dress inside out like so. And finally, our dress is ready. So we have the two ropes by the side. You're just going to tie it like so. So that is how it's going to be on your body. So we've come to the end of this tutorial. If you've watched this tutorial, you've enjoyed it, please don't just walk away. Please give this video a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget to turn on your notification bell. I'll see you in my next tutorial. Bye.